Welcome to our channel. Enjoy the video.
There are fugitives who run from the law. And then there are fugitives who seem to disappear from history itself. No phone calls. No bank accounts. No confirmed sightings. No reliable trail. Just a name on an FBI file, slowly fading into the past. For years, investigators could do nothing but wait. Because sometimes, a fugitive doesn't need to cross a border or hide in a remote cabin. Sometimes, all he has to do is become someone else. The FBI has documented numerous cases in which ordinary photographs helped identify fugitives. In one case, a citizen recognized a wanted fugitive's photograph and helped authorities locate him. In another, a fugitive was identified after his photograph appeared in a newspaper. But this story is different. Because the photograph wasn't supposed to expose him. It wasn't a wanted poster. It wasn't surveillance footage. And it wasn't taken by an FBI agent. It was simply a photograph. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about it. People standing together. A normal moment. A normal day. But somewhere inside that image was a connection investigators had been missing for years. And once someone finally noticed it, the entire story began to unravel. Years earlier, the man at the center of this investigation had become exactly what law enforcement feared most. A fugitive with time on his side. Every passing year made the trail colder. Witnesses forgot details. Old photographs became outdated. Faces changed. And the world around him changed with them. The longer he remained free, the more difficult it became to imagine that investigators would ever find him. But investigators understood something important. A person can change their name. They can change their appearance. They can move to another city. They can even convince the people around them that they are someone completely different. But they can't completely erase their past. Somewhere, something usually survives. A fingerprint. A document. A photograph. A familiar face. Or one tiny detail that nobody thought mattered. And eventually, after years of searching, that detail appeared in the most ordinary place imaginable. A photograph. The kind of photograph that most people would look at and forget. But one person looked twice. And that second look would change everything. Because hidden inside that innocent picture was the first real sign that the man the FBI had been searching for might never have disappeared at all. For 17 years, John List was a ghost. In 1971, List disappeared after the murders of his wife, his 3 children, and his mother inside the family home in Westfield, New Jersey. Then he vanished. No dramatic getaway. No confirmed trail. No clear explanation of where he had gone. And for years, investigators were left with photographs of a man who was getting older while the photograph itself remained frozen in time. But List had something the FBI couldn't photograph. A new life. He eventually settled in Richmond, Virginia, living under the name Robert Clark. To the people around him, he wasn't John List. He was simply Robert. A quiet man. A husband. A neighbor. Someone who had seemingly arrived from nowhere and built an ordinary life. And that was the genius of his disappearance. He didn't just hide his face. He hid his identity. But there was one problem. The FBI still had photographs of the man he used to be. And in 1987, investigators tried something that was still relatively new at the time. They created an age-enhanced image of what John List might look like after nearly 2 decades. The result was circulated publicly. And somewhere in New Jersey, someone looked at that image and felt a chill. Because the face on the page didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone she thought she knew. Her neighbor. The man living under the name Robert Clark. At first, the resemblance wasn't enough. People change. Faces age. A photograph can create false memories. But the suspicion refused to disappear. The woman eventually contacted her son-in-law, who passed the information to the FBI. Agents went to confront Clark. And when they did, he denied being John List. But the investigators had something stronger than a photograph. They had science. Fingerprints from an old gun permit application were compared with List's records. The result confirmed what the photograph had suggested. Robert Clark was John List. The fugitive who had disappeared for 17 years had been living in plain sight. And suddenly, the photograph wasn't just a picture anymore. It was a bridge between two identities. One man from the past. And another man who had spent years pretending that past never existed. But there was still one question. How had List managed to live for nearly 2 decades without anyone realizing who he really was? Because the photograph hadn't caught him by accident. It had exposed something he couldn't completely change. His face. For 17 years, John List had managed something investigators once thought was almost impossible. He had disappeared. Without truly disappearing. He worked. He attended church. He remarried. He lived under the name Robert P. Clark. And to the people around him, there was no obvious reason to suspect that the quiet accountant next door was actually one of America's most wanted fugitives. But in 1987, the FBI tried something different. Instead of asking, "Where is John List?" they asked a much more dangerous question. What would John List look like now? Using photographs from before the murders, FBI specialists created an age-enhanced image showing how List might have appeared after 16 years on the run. The image was then publicized. And eventually, someone recognized him. Not an FBI agent. Not a detective. A woman who had lived near List under his assumed identity. She saw the image in a supermarket tabloid. And something about the face stopped her. It looked like the man she knew as Robert Clark. The resemblance was disturbing enough that she considered confronting his wife. But she didn't. The lead went nowhere. For the moment. And List continued living his carefully constructed life. Then, 2 years later, the case received another unexpected push. The television program America's Most Wanted featured the List case, including a forensic artist's age-progressed likeness of him. By then, List had moved to Midlothian, Virginia. The broadcast put his face back in front of the public. And this time, the woman who had already suspected her neighbor was John List became convinced. She contacted her son-in-law. He contacted the FBI. And finally, investigators had an address. After nearly 18 years, they knew where the man they were looking for was living. But knowing where he wasn't enough. When FBI agents confronted him, the man calling himself Robert Clark denied that he was John List. He had spent years maintaining that identity. And he wasn't about to surrender it because of a photograph. So the FBI needed something that couldn't be explained away. Something that didn't care about aliases. Something that didn't change with age. Fingerprints. Investigators found a fingerprint record connected to List from before the murders. They compared it with the man standing in front of them. And the result left almost nothing to argue about. Robert Clark was John List. The fugitive had been found. The alias was finished. And the photograph that seemed so ordinary had ultimately done what years of searching had failed to accomplish. It put a face to the ghost. But there was still one final mystery. Why had List been able to live undetected for so long? When the most important evidence against him had been waiting in government files the entire time? And when investigators finally brought the case back into the courtroom? The man who had denied being John List would have to face the identity he had spent nearly 2 decades running from. For nearly 18 years, John List had lived as someone else. But on June 1, 1989, the life he had constructed finally collapsed. The FBI confronted the man known as Robert Clark. He denied being John List. But investigators had something he couldn't explain away. A fingerprint record from a gun permit application filed shortly before the 1971 murders. The fingerprints matched. Robert Clark was John Emil List. The fugitive who had vanished in 1971 had been living under an assumed identity for years. The FBI's own account describes the age-enhanced photograph as a key step that helped a former neighbor recognize him, while the fingerprint comparison ultimately confirmed his identity. And suddenly, the mystery of the missing man was over. There was no secret hiding place. No foreign country. No elaborate disguise. He had simply built another life. But the photograph had cracked the disguise. And the fingerprints had finished the job. List was extradited to New Jersey, where he eventually stood trial for the murders. For years, he had avoided the consequences of what happened inside that Westfield house. He had changed his name, changed his location, changed his appearance. But he couldn't change the evidence that connected him to his former identity. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part of the entire case. The FBI didn't find John List because someone stumbled across him on a dark street. They found him because an ordinary person looked at an image and recognized something everyone else had missed. A face. A memory. A possibility. That possibility became a tip. The tip became an investigation. And the investigation became an arrest. 17 years of silence. Broken by a photograph. John List was eventually convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. He died in prison in 2008. But his case left behind a lesson investigators would use again and again. A fugitive can run from a name. He can run from a photograph. He can even build an entirely new life. But somewhere, the old identity may still be waiting. And sometimes, all it takes is one person looking twice. Because the photograph that exposed John List wasn't supposed to be a confession. It was simply an attempt to show the world what a missing man might look like after 17 years. Instead, it showed the world exactly who he had become. For 17 years, John List believed he had solved the problem. He had disappeared. He had changed his name. He had built a new life. And perhaps most importantly, he had convinced the people around him that John List no longer existed. But there was one thing he couldn't erase. His face. An age-progressed photograph gave someone a reason to look twice. That second look became a suspicion. The suspicion became an FBI tip. And the tip eventually led investigators to the man hiding behind the name Robert Clark. Then came the fingerprints. The final piece of evidence. The ghost had a name again. John List. The photograph didn't arrest him. It didn't prove the murders. But it did something just as important. It made people ask the question he had spent nearly 2 decades trying to prevent. What if the man we were looking for never really disappeared? In the end, List wasn't discovered in some secret hideout. He was found living an ordinary life. And that may be the most disturbing lesson of the case. Sometimes the person you're searching for isn't miles away. Sometimes they're living quietly in a neighborhood. Going to work. Meeting people. And waiting for everyone to stop looking. Until one day, someone sees a photograph. And recognizes a face that was never supposed to be seen again. Because you can change your name. You can change your life. But you can't always escape your own face.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our next video. See you in the next one.